The air had the texture of a hot, wet towel someone had left in a gym bag for a week. That's Florida in late August for you. It's a sensory experience you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, which, as it turns out, was about to manifest in human form across the street. On the TV inside, a meteorologist with a terrifyingly cheerful demeanor was pointing at a swirling vortex of doom named Hurricane Amanda. Amanda was a Category 4, and she was doing a whole lot more than just knocking on Florida's door. She was preparing to kick it in, steal the good china, and leave a saltwater puddle on the new laminate flooring. I, however, was the picture of tranquility, sitting on my porch rocker, sipping a lukewarm coffee. Panic is for amateurs. I'm a planner. My entire life revolves around logistics. I own a mid-sized warehouse and distribution company, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days solving puzzles that involve getting very large things from point A to point B without them falling over, breaking, or getting lost in Nebraska. A hurricane is just a very large, very wet puzzle. And for months I'd been planning the master stroke of my suburban existence, the bunker. My wife, Chloe, called it the bunker. I preferred the term subterranean storm shelter and tactical recreation annex. It was less about surviving the apocalypse and more about having a soundproofed, Wi-Fi-enabled concrete box where I could ride out the 2 weeks my in-laws visit every Christmas. The hurricane just gave me the perfect excuse to finally pull the trigger. No one can argue with safety, even when that safety is primarily from your mother-in-law's opinions on your career choices. A deep guttural groan of a diesel engine, followed by the pneumatic psh of air brakes, sliced through the humid air. I grinned. It was here. Showtime. An 18-wheeler flatbed, the kind of rig that hauls tanks or other trucks, was artfully navigating the gentle curve of our cul-de-sac. Our street, Whispering Pines Lane, was not designed for this level of commerce. The truck's tires kissed the edges of perfectly manicured lawns, and I saw at least 3 garden gnomes look on in silent, ceramic terror. Perched atop its flatbed was my glorious bounty. Steel-reinforced concrete forms, a web of rebar, pallets of high-grade sealant, and the crown jewel, a diesel generator the size of a Fiat 500, capable of powering a small village, or, more importantly, my 75-inch TV and the beer fridge for the foreseeable future. Chloe came out the front door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at the truck, then at me, her eyebrow arched into a perfect question mark. "Is that it?" she asked. "My God, Jack, it looks like you're building a secret lair to take over the world." "World domination starts with a solid foundation, honey," I said, getting up from my rocker. "And a backup generator that can power a small city, or at least our Nespresso machine. Priorities?" The truck driver, a man whose weary face suggested he'd seen the dark underbelly of every HOA in America, gave me a hopeful look. I gave him a thumbs up and pointed to the curb in front of our driveway. He nodded, expertly beginning the delicate process of aligning his behemoth with the drop zone. And then she appeared. It started as a flicker of movement in the window across the street. The curtains twitched. The front door opened with a slow, deliberate creak, as if announcing the arrival of a final boss. Out walked Brenda, a woman who didn't just live in our neighborhood. She reigned over it with an iron fist and a 3-ring binder. She was the HOA president, a title she held with the same gravity a king holds a scepter. She was dressed in her typical battle regalia, beige capri pants, a pink polo shirt, and pristine white sneakers. In her hand was not a scepter, but something far more dangerous. The HOA binder. It was a weapon of mass frustration, 3 inches thick and filled with covenants, restrictions, and soul-crushing amendments. She didn't walk, she marched. Her destination? The sliver of asphalt directly in front of the 18-wheeler. She planted her feet, crossed her arms, and stood there, A 5-foot 4-inch blockade of pure, unadulterated entitlement. The truck driver, Diego, leaned out his window. Ma'am, I just need to park here for a little bit." Brenda ignored him. Her eyes were locked on me as I walked toward the unfolding drama. "Morning, Brenda," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Beautiful day for some light construction, huh? Don't worry, we'll be out of everyone's hair in an hour or two." "Absolutely not," she declared, her voice ringing with the kind of authority usually reserved for air traffic controllers or drill sergeants. "You cannot bring this monstrosity into our neighborhood." "It's just a delivery truck, Brenda. It's not moving in." She scoffed, a sound like air leaking from a dying balloon. She opened her sacred binder, flipping to a tabbed page with practiced speed. "I will refer you to Section 12, Article 4, Subsection C of the Willow Creek Estates Bylaws," she announced, her finger tracing the line of text as if it were scripture. "No commercial vehicles exceeding 2 axles are permitted on residential streets for purposes other than direct, pre-approved municipal services." She looked up, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Was this pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee?" I blinked. "The Architectural Review Committee? It's a pile of concrete and rebar, not a 60-foot flamingo statue. Besides, there's a Category 4 hurricane coming. You've seen the news. This is a disaster supply truck." "The only disaster I see is the flagrant disregard for our community's aesthetic and regulations," she retorted, completely unfazed. "The bylaws are in place to protect our property values. They don't get suspended for a little bit of weather." A little bit of weather. The meteorologist had just used the phrase catastrophic wind speeds. Diego, bless his heart, tried to intervene. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I have a schedule to keep. I just need to drop this stuff and go." Brenda didn't even grant him a glance. She pulled out her phone, aimed it at the truck's cab, and took a photo with a loud, theatrical snap. "What's the name of your company, driver? I'll be reporting this illegal stop to them and to the Department of Transportation. I'm sure they'll be interested to know their drivers are violating local ordinances." Diego's face went from weary to crestfallen. He slumped back into his cab, defeated. This was Brenda's signature move. Go after the little guy just trying to do his job. My smile vanished. The last shred of my neighborly diplomacy evaporated in the humid air. "Brenda, this is ridiculous," I said, my voice low. "It's an emergency." "The bylaws are the bylaws, Jack," she said, her tone final. And then, to add a final, perfect layer of absurdity to the situation, she unfolded a lightweight aluminum lawn chair she'd apparently been holding under her arm, popped it open with a flourish, and sat down. Right there, in the middle of the street, 10 feet in front of the truck's grill. She crossed her legs, placed the open binder on her lap, and looked at me with an expression of unyielding, smug satisfaction. The standoff had begun. For a full minute, nobody moved. The only sounds were the low rumble of the truck's idling engine and the distant, cheerful chirping of a bird that was clearly unaware of the human stupidity unfolding below. Diego looked at me from his cab with a "what now" expression. I looked at Brenda, who was pretending to read her binder with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts. It was clear she was prepared to sit there until the heat death of the universe, or at least until my delivery truck was forced to retreat in shame. My first instinct was to engage in a rational argument. This was, of course, a rookie mistake. Trying to use logic on Brenda was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. "Brenda," I started, adopting the calm, soothing tone one might use on a spooked horse or a toddler having a tantrum. "Let's be reasonable. The truck unloads, it leaves, and in 2 hours it's like it was never here. The road will be clear." "The damage will have been done," she said without looking up. "The precedent will be set. First, it's a flatbed truck. Then what? Mobile homes? A carnival? We must hold the line, Jack, for the good of the community. Holding the line. She said it like she was defending the Alamo. I was defending my right to have a generator that could keep my ice cream frozen. We were not the same. Plan B. Go over her head. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the HOA management company, a faceless entity in an office park 40 miles away that collected our dues and sent threatening letters about lawn maintenance. After navigating a phone tree clearly designed by a sadist, I was placed on hold. A tinny, instrumental version of Don't Go Breaking My Heart was piped directly into my ear. It was a fitting soundtrack for the slow death of my will to live. Finally, a bored-sounding woman named Cheryl picked up. I explained the situation in excruciating detail. The hurricane, the supplies, the truck, the woman in the lawn chair who had appointed herself the guardian of Whispering Pines Lane. "I see," Cheryl said, her voice dripping with apathy. "And you're saying the president, Brenda Miller, is the one blocking the vehicle?" "Yes, she's sitting in the middle of the road." "Well, according to Section 4, Article 2 of the governing documents, only the acting HOA president has the authority to grant an emergency waiver for vehicle restrictions." "But she's the one causing the emergency," I nearly shouted into the phone. "I understand your frustration, sir," Cheryl said, in a tone that made it clear she did not, in fact, understand my frustration. "But our hands are tied. You'll have to resolve it with Mrs. Miller directly." A useless, bureaucratic Ouroboros. I hung up, the jaunty piano of Elton John still echoing in my brain. My last resort, the one I hated to use because it felt like admitting defeat, was to call the authorities. I dialed the non-emergency police line. 15 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up. 2 officers got out. The first, Officer Miller, had a thick mustache and the weary eyes of a man who had responded to one too many calls about stolen garden gnomes. The second, Officer Davis, was younger, greener, and had a slight smirk playing on his lips as he took in the bizarre suburban tableau. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Miller asked, his voice a gravelly monotone. I explained. Brenda explained, holding up her binder like it was a holy relic. Diego, the truck driver, just sighed and shook his head, the universal sign for, "I don't get paid enough for this." Officer Miller listened patiently, his expression unchanging. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Brenda, "I appreciate your civic duty, but you can't just sit in the middle of the road. It's a public right-of-way." "Actually, officer, it's a private road," Brenda corrected him, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's owned and maintained by the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I am the president of said association, and I am enforcing our legally binding covenants. This vehicle," she pointed a trembling finger at the truck, "is in violation." I jumped in. "She's blocking a critical delivery for hurricane supplies. The governor himself told us to prepare." Officer Miller held up a hand. He walked over to the curb, looked at the street sign, and then spoke into his radio. He waited a few moments. The smirk on Officer Davis's face was growing. Miller's shoulders slumped. "Well, I'll be. She's right. According to the county plat, this street was never dedicated to the city. It's private property." He turned to me. "Look, son, my hands are tied. As long as she's on HOA property, it's a civil matter. It's an HOA dispute. We can't physically move her unless she's actively endangering someone or breaking a state law. Being an infuriating busybody, unfortunately, isn't illegal." Officer Davis coughed, a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh. Brenda's smugness level went from 100 to about 1,000. She had beaten the law. She had beaten me. "Try to work it out," Miller said, which was the official police code for, "You're on your own, good luck." They got back in their car and drove away, leaving me alone with my nemesis and my rapidly dwindling options. Diego leaned out of his cab again. "Look, man, I'm sorry. My dispatcher is on my case. I can wait maybe another 30 minutes, then I gotta go. My logbook is screaming at me." Defeated, I trudged back to my house. The front door opened, and I was met by the smell of brewing coffee and Chloe's sympathetic face. I collapsed onto the couch, ran my hands through my hair, and let out a long, frustrated groan. "Let me guess," she said, handing me a fresh mug. "The Queen of Whispering Pines refuses to abdicate her throne of cheap aluminum and polyester." She quoted the bylaws at a cop, Chloe, and she won. I took a gulp of coffee. The truck is going to leave. All that stuff is going back to the depot, and I'll be stuck riding out the storm with nothing but a half-eaten bag of stale pretzels while Brenda polishes her HOA President of the Year award. I paced the living room, a caged animal in my own home. I stress-ate 3 granola bars and a handful of chocolate chips I found in the pantry. It was the injustice of it that was eating me alive. I solve logistical problems for a living. I move mountains of cargo across the country. My entire professional life is about finding efficient ways to overcome obstacles. And right now, the obstacle was a woman in beige capri pants. And she was winning. It was a personal and professional affront. My eyes scanned the room, looking for some kind of inspiration, and landed on the mantel. There was a collection of framed photos: our wedding, Chloe's graduation, a picture of our dog, and one more. It was a photo from my company's 10th anniversary party. Me and my core crew, Sal, Mike, and the rest of the guys, standing proudly in front of our biggest, most powerful forklift. We'd nicknamed her Big Bertha. She was a 15-ton beast of yellow steel and hydraulic power, capable of lifting a small house. I stopped pacing. I stared at the photo. Big Bertha. My other forklifts, the nimble Skytrack lifts, the little JCB for tight corners, a whole fleet of problem-solving machinery sitting idle in my warehouse just 20 minutes away. My brain, which had been sputtering and stalling, suddenly kicked into high gear. The gears began to turn, clicking into place with a beautiful, simple, and utterly deranged logic. I started connecting the dots of Brenda's argument. The bylaws, the wording, commercial vehicles exceeding 2 axles, illegal stop, conducting business. She was a creature of technicalities. And technicalities, my friend, were a game I could play. A slow grin spread across my face. It started small, then grew into a full-blown Cheshire cat beam. Chloe saw it, and her eyes went wide. "Oh no," she said, backing away slowly. "I know that look. That's the I'm about to solve a problem with a bigger, more expensive, and possibly illegal problem look. What are you thinking, Jack?" I turned to her, my eyes sparkling with the thrill of a truly terrible, wonderfully brilliant idea. "Brenda is right," I said, my voice filled with newfound purpose. "The truck can't be here to conduct business. The bylaws are very clear." I paused for dramatic effect. "But they say nothing about a homeowner using his own personal equipment to move his personal property. And they definitely say nothing about a forklift convoy." Chloe stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. "You wouldn't!" "Brenda wanted to invoke the bylaws. Fine." I grabbed my phone, already scrolling to my foreman's number. "We're going to get technical. We're going to get so technical, so maliciously compliant, that her binder-loving brain will short-circuit." I held up the phone. "Call my guys. It's time to bring the warehouse to Whispering Pines." The next 10 minutes were a blur of motion and purpose. The fog of frustration had lifted, replaced by the crystal-clear adrenaline of a plan so audacious it just had to work. My living room transformed into a makeshift command center. Chloe, shaking her head but unable to hide a small smile, was now my co-conspirator, grabbing me a notepad and a fresh pen. The first call was the most important. I dialed Sal, my lead foreman. Sal had been with me for 15 years. He was a man of few words, immense competence, and an unwavering loyalty that I typically repaid with generous Christmas bonuses and by not asking too many questions when he needed a Friday off at the last minute. The phone rang once before he picked up. "Yeah, boss." "Sal," I said, my voice low and urgent, like I was initiating a secret mission. "Scrap whatever you're doing. I have a priority 1 situation." "Something wrong with the shipment for Consolidated?" "No, something is very wrong with the shipment for my driveway. Listen, I need you, Mike, and the 3 new guys. Tell them it's a paid emergency field exercise. And Sal, I need the toys." There was a pause on the other end. Sal knew my inventory better than I did. He knew what the toys meant. "All of them?" he asked, a hint of excitement creeping into his gruff voice. "You mean, you want Big Bertha?" "I want Big Bertha. I want the 2 SkyTrack telehandlers. And throw in the little JCB for good measure. The turning radius on this street is a nightmare. I want a parade of yellow steel, Sal. Can you make it happen?" "Boss, what in the hell is going on? Are we building a skyscraper before lunch?" "We are engaging in an advanced logistical operation to counter a hostile blockade of essential domestic assets," I said, savoring the ridiculous jargon. Another pause. I could practically hear him scratching his head. "So we're moving some stuff at your house?" "Exactly," I confirmed. "Meet me at the entrance to my neighborhood in 45 minutes. Oh, and Sal, have everyone wear their high-vis vests and hard hats. We need to look impeccably professional. It's important for the optics." He just grunted an affirmative and hung up. He knew better than to ask for more details. When I got that tone in my voice, it was best to just load up the equipment and enjoy the ride. The second call was to Gus, the contractor who was supposed to start digging the hole for the bunker this afternoon. Gus was a grizzled, 60-something Vietnam vet who communicated mostly in grunts and terse one-liners. He'd seen everything, and nothing surprised him. "Gus?" I said when he answered. "Jack," he replied. "You still on for this afternoon? There's a slight change of plans for the material delivery." "It ain't here yet?" "Oh, it's here. It's just temporarily indisposed. The materials won't be neatly stacked in the driveway. They'll be, let's call it, strategically positioned on the street. Be ready for a bit of a show." I could hear a dry chuckle on the other end of the line. "Long as the stuff's there and the check clears, you can have it delivered by carrier pigeon for all I care, kid. Just tell my guys where to find it." "Excellent. See you in a bit." I hung up. With the key players notified, it was time for the battle plan. I went into the garage and grabbed the large whiteboard I used for project planning. I drew a crude but effective map of my cul-de-sac. I used a red magnet for Brenda's lawn chair blockade, a big rectangular magnet for Diego's truck, and a small square for my driveway, the designated extraction point. Chloe came in, holding 2 bottles of water. She watched me draw yellow arrows indicating the planned movement of my incoming forklift fleet. "You've completely lost your mind," she said, though there was no malice in it. It was a simple statement of fact. "Have I?" I countered, tapping the whiteboard with my marker. "Look, the bylaw Brenda is quoting prohibits commercial vehicles from conducting business. The truck isn't my vehicle. And once my guys get here, he won't be conducting business. He'll be a passive observer to a private citizen moving his own property." I grabbed a few smaller magnets and put them on the board, representing my machines. "The forklifts? They are all registered to my company, yes, but I am the sole owner. Ergo, they are my personal property. There is no bylaw against me parking my personal property at my own house, and if I use my personal property to move my other personal property, the generator, the rebar, etc., from one spot on a private road to another spot on my private driveway, well, what law have I broken?" Chloe processed this. Her legal mind, usually employed to review corporate contracts, was now analyzing the insane logic of what I was proposing. "It's malicious compliance," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "It's brilliantly, beautifully petty. You found a loophole big enough to drive a forklift through." "Several, actually," I said, grinning. "Brenda lives in a black-and-white world governed by her binder. I'm about to introduce a whole lot of yellow-painted gray area." I gave Diego a quick call to update him. "Diego, it's Jack. I need 30 more minutes of your time. Just sit tight. Do not move. Do not engage the crazy lady. Help is on the way." "What kind of help?" he asked, his voice wary. "The best kind," I said cryptically, and hung up. The final touch was communication. I dug out the set of high-powered walkie-talkies we used at the warehouse for coordinating in the yard. I handed one to Chloe. "You'll be my eye in the sky," I told her. "Give me a heads up if Brenda clones herself or calls in reinforcements." "Roger that, Command," she said, playing along. "You are a child, Jack. A giant, overgrown child with access to heavy machinery." "And don't you ever forget it," I said, grabbing my own walkie-talkie and a high-vis vest. I put it on over my polo shirt. It felt like putting on a suit of armor. I walked to the end of my driveway, struck a commanding pose, and waited. The air was still thick and humid, but now it felt different. It was electric, buzzing with the promise of impending chaos. Brenda, still sitting in her chair, gave me a contemptuous look. She thought she had won. She had no idea that the cavalry was coming, and it ran on diesel. It started as a feeling more than a sound, a low, deep vibration that resonated up through the soles of my sneakers. It was the kind of thrum that suggested something large and heavy was approaching. Brenda, still defiantly guarding her patch of asphalt, looked up from her binder, an annoyed expression on her face. She probably thought it was the municipal garbage truck, come to violate some other obscure noise ordinance. The vibration grew into a rumble, the distinct, throaty chug of multiple diesel engines working in concert. Around the corner at the entrance to Whispering Pines Lane, a flash of brilliant yellow appeared. The first machine to enter our tranquil suburban paradise was one of the Skytrack telehandlers, its long telescopic boom retracted. It moved slowly, cautiously, its oversized tires looking comical on the pristine blacktop. A moment later, its twin appeared, followed by the smaller, more agile JCB. And then, the main event. Big Bertha crawled around the corner like some prehistoric, steel-plated beast. Her 15-ton frame made the little manhole covers rattle. Her engine wasn't a rumble. It was a deep, chest-thumping roar that announced her presence with absolute authority. My foreman Sal was at the controls, a grimly determined look on his face, his hard hat gleaming in the afternoon sun. The convoy of 4 forklifts, a phalanx of industrial power, rolled down the street in perfect, disciplined formation. It was the most beautiful, most absurd thing I had ever seen. The brilliant yellow of the machinery was a shocking slash of color against the muted greens and beiges of the neighborhood. They passed manicured lawns, decorative mailboxes shaped like lighthouses, and neatly trimmed hedges. A few neighbors, drawn out by the noise, stood on their porches with their mouths hanging open. Brenda scrambled to her feet. Her face, which had been a mask of smug victory, was now a confused canvas of shock and outrage. Her brain was clearly struggling to process what was happening. This scenario was not covered in her binder. I brought the walkie-talkie to my lips, clicking the button. "All right, team, let's get in position. Operation Unload is a go. I repeat, we are a go." My crew, true professionals that they were, didn't hesitate. Sal maneuvered Big Bertha to the side, creating a staging area. The 2 Skytracks flanked the 18-wheeler, one on the street side, one on the lawn side. My lawn, which I had pre-approved for tactical maneuvers. The little JCB zipped around to handle the smaller pallets. They moved with a practiced, mechanical ballet that was a joy to behold. Before they started the main event, Mike, one of my guys, hopped off his machine and began setting up a perimeter of bright orange safety cones around the truck, my driveway, and most importantly, around Brenda. He did it with a straight face, creating a little safe zone for her that effectively penned her in. "Ma'am, for your safety, please remain behind the designated cone area," he said with an utter lack of irony. Brenda was sputtering, pointing a trembling finger at the mechanical army that had besieged her quiet street. "What is this? You can't do this. This is a violation. This is industrial." Her protests were mostly lost in the symphony of whining hydraulics and beeping reverse alarms as the operation began. I stood in my driveway, arms crossed, directing the show like a deranged conductor. "Alpha Team," I said into the walkie-talkie, nodding at the first sky track. "You're on the generator. Let's get the big boy moved first." The telehandler's boom extended, rising high into the air. The forks at the end locked securely under the massive steel frame of the generator. With a groan of powerful machinery, the generator, all 2 tons of it, was lifted effortlessly from the truck bed. It swung in a majestic arc, high over the cab of the 18-wheeler, over the patch of road Brenda had claimed, and was deposited onto my driveway with a gentle, ground-shaking thud that was as soft as a feather falling. It was a masterpiece of precision. Diego, the truck driver, was leaning out of his window, his phone out, recording the entire thing. He was laughing so hard I thought he might fall out of his cab. Brenda, realizing her blockade was being literally bypassed from above, went nuclear. She pulled out her phone, and I could see her jabbing at the screen, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "I'm calling the police! You're all going to be arrested! Trespassing, vandalism, conspiracy!" "Bravo Team, you're on pallets 1 through 5, I said into my radio, ignoring her. "Charlie, you run interference. Continue establishing the safety perimeter." Pallet after pallet of rebar, concrete forms, and building materials followed the same aerial route, a conveyor belt in the sky, from the truck bed to my driveway. We weren't touching the truck. We weren't unloading it in the commercial sense. We were, as I had planned, simply relocating my personal property from one location to another. Sure enough, 10 minutes into the operation, a police cruiser pulled up again, this time with a bit more urgency. Officers Miller and Davis got out. Miller looked like he had aged 10 years since their last visit. He looked at the forklifts, at the pallet of rebar currently suspended in mid-air, at Brenda, who was practically vibrating with fury, and then at me. He let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every ridiculous suburban dispute in human history. Officer Davis, on the other hand, was failing spectacularly at maintaining a professional demeanor. He was biting his lip to keep from laughing, and his eyes were wide with what I could only describe as pure, unadulterated glee. He looked like a kid who had just been given a front-row seat to the circus. "Okay, what in the Sam Hill is going on now?" Miller demanded, his voice flat. Brenda ran up to him. "Arrest him! Arrest all of them! Look at this! He's brought a construction site to my street. He's violating every rule in the book. This is a flagrant, egregious violation." I walked over calmly, holding the walkie-talkie in one hand and, for effect, my own copy of the HOA bylaws in the other. "Officer Miller, Officer Davis," I said with a polite nod. "Good to see you again. I'm glad you're here to witness this safe and orderly transfer of private property." Miller stared at me. "Safe and orderly? Jack, there are 4 forklifts on a residential street." "And I'm so glad you're here to help ensure everyone's safety," I replied smoothly. "As you can see, the commercial vehicle," I gestured to Diego's truck, "is merely stopped, patiently waiting for traffic to clear. He is not conducting any business. My associates and I are simply using our personal property. I made a grand, sweeping gesture to the fleet of yellow machines. To move my other personal property from point A, the truck bed, to point B, my driveway. I held up the bylaws. I've checked, and there is no rule against it. It's no different than me asking my friends to help me carry some heavy groceries from my car, Officer Davis finally cracked. He let out a snort of laughter that he tried to disguise as a cough. That's a very large grocery, sir. Miller shot him a glare before turning his tired eyes back to me. His truck isn't parked or conducting business, he repeated, processing my logic. And your forklifts? Are they street legal? They are fully insured as off-road vehicles, I said, having already anticipated this question. We are operating them at under 5 miles per hour, and according to state law, it's perfectly legal to cross a public or private road to gain access to a piece of private property. In this case, my driveway. Miller stood there, rubbing his temples. He knew he was beaten. I hadn't broken a single law. I had just bent the rules of social decency into a pretzel. He was looking at a situation that was 100% legal and 1,000% insane. He turned to Brenda. Ma'am, he's right. There's nothing illegal happening here. In fact, by standing in the road, you are now the one creating a public nuisance and obstructing the lawful operation of his personal vehicles. Brenda's jaw dropped. She looked from the cop, to me, to the final pallet of supplies being gently lowered onto my driveway. The checkmate was complete. Now I'm going to have to ask you to return to your property, ma'am, before I have to write you a citation, Miller said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Defeated. Utterly and completely defeated by technicalities and tonnage. She gave me a look of pure hatred, a look that promised future complaints about lawn height and trash can placement, then turned and scurried back to her house, her binder of broken dreams clutched to her chest. The entire unloading process took 27 minutes. As my crew finished up, a smattering of applause broke out from the neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle. One of them, a tech guy named Mr. Henderson from down the street, had been live-streaming the whole thing on his phone. "The video is going nuts in the neighborhood Facebook group," he shouted over to me. "I titled it Suburban Showdown Man vs. HOA Karen Forklift Edition." My guys lined up the forklifts for a triumphant exit. Diego leaned out of his cab, giving me a huge, grateful smile and a thumbs up. "Man, you are my hero," he yelled over the engine noise. With a final honk of his horn, he put the truck in gear and pulled away, finally free. Just as the last forklift was preparing to leave, Gus, the contractor's beat-up pickup truck, pulled up. He got out, took off his sunglasses, and surveyed the scene. The 4 massive forklifts, the mountain of materials in my driveway, the lingering crowd of amused neighbors. He let out a long, slow whistle. He walked over to me, a grin cracking his weathered face. "Kid," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "you've got style." The forklift convoy may have left Whispering Pines Lane, but the shockwaves were just beginning to ripple through the community. That evening, my phone buzzed with a notification from the neighborhood Facebook group. A new post from Brenda. Urgent. Emergency HOA Zoom meeting tonight at 8 p.m. Topic: flagrant bylaw violations and threats to community integrity. She included a link, clearly expecting the digital equivalent of a public flogging with me as the guest of honor. Chloe and I logged on at 7:59 p.m., armed with a bowl of popcorn. The screen was a chaotic grid of faces. Brenda was in the main window, her background a blurred image of what looked like a sterile doctor's office. She had a gavel, a real wooden gavel, which she banged on her desk to start the meeting. It made a pathetic thwack sound through the laptop speakers. "This emergency meeting has been called," she began, her voice tight with suppressed rage, to address the unprecedented and appalling incident that occurred today on Whispering Pines Lane. She launched into a tirade, using words like egregious, unconscionable, and industrial blight. She shared her screen to show the blurry, zoomed-in photos she had taken of the forklifts, presenting them as if they were evidence from a crime scene. Mr. Jack Riley, she said, her voice dripping with venom, took it upon himself to violate a dozen of our most sacred covenants. He brought a commercial construction fleet into our peaceful community, endangering children and pets and making a mockery of the rules that protect our property values. She called for immediate, severe fines to be levied against me. A fine for each forklift, a fine for the noise, a fine for what she termed aesthetic terrorism. When she finished her opening statement, she unmuted the other participants for comment, clearly expecting a chorus of agreement. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a hand icon popped up next to the name, Robert Henderson. "Brenda, if I may," Mr. Henderson said calmly. "I think your photos fail to capture the full context of the situation." "And what context could possibly excuse this?" Brenda snapped. "Well," Henderson said with a sly grin, "I happen to have a video of the entire event. With your permission, I'd like to share my screen." Before Brenda could object, Henderson's screen popped up. It was the live stream, complete with a running comment feed of laughing and cheering emojis. The video played from the moment the forklifts arrived. It showed Brenda's blockade. It showed the police confirming I wasn't breaking any laws. Most importantly, it showed a highly professional crew, safely and efficiently moving materials, while Brenda screamed about bylaws in the background. It didn't make me look like a villain. It made her look like a lunatic. When the video ended, the floodgates opened. "She tried to find me last month because my garden hose wasn't coiled in a perfect circle," said Mrs. Gable from number 12. "She sent me a formal warning because my son's basketball hoop was a shade of orange she deemed garish," added a man from 2 streets over. "She measured my lawn with a ruler. She told me my welcome mat was excessively whimsical." The meeting devolved into an all-out rebellion. It was no longer about my forklifts. It was about years of pent-up frustration with Brenda's petty tyranny. The Zoom call was a digital storming of the Bastille, and Brenda was the one being put on trial. The last thing I saw before she abruptly ended the meeting was a motion being proposed in the chat for a vote of no confidence in her leadership. I logged off, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "I think that went well," I said to Chloe, grabbing another handful of popcorn. The next morning, Gus and his 2-man crew arrived, ready to work. Gus, a man I now considered a kindred spirit, surveyed the mountain of supplies I had so dramatically acquired. "So, let me get this straight," he said, picking up a piece of rebar and examining it. "The whole parade yesterday, the 4 forklifts, the cops, the neighborhood drama, you did all that for a storm shelter?" "Gus, it was never just about the storm shelter," I said, leaning against a pallet of concrete mix. "It was about sending a message, a very large, yellow, diesel-powered message." Gus let out another one of his dry chuckles and clapped me hard on the back. "I like you, kid. You're all right. Tell you what, I'm taking 10% off the labor cost. Call it an entertainment fee." His crew got to work, and the sounds of shovels hitting dirt and the whir of power tools soon replaced the memory of the forklift engines. The construction was loud, sure, but the neighborhood's reaction was completely different from what Brenda would have predicted. Now that the context was clear, my project had become a symbol of resistance. Mrs. Gable brought over a pitcher of ice-cold lemonade and a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies for Gus and his crew. Mr. Henderson stopped by to tell me his video had over 10,000 views on the local news website. People would drive by, slow down, and give me a thumbs up. I was no longer just Jack from number 8. I was the Forklift guy, a suburban folk hero. Across the street, Brenda's house was silent. The curtains remained drawn. We didn't see her for days. The only sign of life was the occasional twitch of the blinds, a silent, resentful surveillance of the foundation of my bunker and the tomb of her HOA presidency being laid. Every clang of steel and every bag of concrete being mixed felt like another nail in the coffin of her reign. The hole in my backyard grew deeper, a tangible monument to the day logic, loopholes, and a whole lot of horsepower had won. The fallout from the emergency Zoom meeting was swift and decisive. A petition for a special election circulated through the neighborhood with the speed of a viral meme. Within a week, the votes were cast and tallied. Brenda wasn't just defeated, she was routed. The final tally was something like 58-1. I suspect her own husband voted against her just to have some peace and quiet. The new HOA president was Dave from down the block, a chill guy in his 40s whose primary life philosophy seemed to be live and let live. I saw him a few days after the election while he was walking his golden retriever. "Hey, Jack," he said, extending a hand. "No hard feelings about the, industrial parade, man. Honestly, it was awesome." "Thanks, Dave. Congrats on the new gig." "Yeah, well, someone had to do it," he said with a shrug. "My first official act is going to be declaring a 5-year moratorium on all bylaws pertaining to axle counts, commercial vehicle tonnage, and the approved shades of orange for basketball hoops." He winked. "Just try not to land a helicopter in the cul-de-sac, all right?" Gus and his crew worked wonders. Motivated by the free cookies and the sheer entertainment value of the job's origin story, they finished the bunker in record time. It was a thing of beauty, a reinforced concrete box buried under my backyard, complete with ventilation, plumbing, and enough power outlets to charge every electronic device in a 10-mile radius. We finished just in time. Hurricane Amanda, after wobbling in the Atlantic for a few days, took a hard right turn and made a beeline for our coastline. The evacuation orders for the low-lying areas went out. The wind began to howl, and the sky turned a bruised, ugly shade of gray. That night, the storm hit. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the entire neighborhood into a deep, disorienting darkness. The wind shrieked, and rain lashed against the windows with the force of a pressure washer. But inside our house, a moment after the power died, there was a soft clunk from the backyard followed by a deep, steady hum. The Fiat-sized generator kicked on. Our lights flickered back to life, warm and defiant against the raging storm outside. My house was an island of light in a sea of blackness. Chloe and I stood by the living room window, watching the outlines of palm trees whip back and forth in the wind. "Well," she said, sipping a glass of wine. "You did it. Your anti-in-law fortress is now our hurricane command center." The next morning, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving behind a world of downed branches, debris-strewn lawns, and an eerie silence. The power was still out, and the utility company was estimating it could be for days. I fired up the coffee maker, feeling an immense sense of satisfaction. I went into the garage, grabbed a few heavy-duty extension cords, and ran one over to the Gables house next door, and another to the Hendersons on the other side. Soon, their refrigerators were humming back to life, and they were able to charge their phones. By afternoon, my garage had turned into an impromptu neighborhood charging station and social hub. People came by with their power strips and thermoses, sharing storm stories and marveling at the generator. I fired up the gas grill and threw on some burgers. It felt like a bizarre post-hurricane block party. The sense of community was palpable. From the garage, I had a clear view across the street to Brenda's house. It was dark and silent. No generator hummed in her backyard. No lights glowed in her windows. Through the front window, I could just make out the lonely, flickering pinpoint of a single candle on her kitchen table. As the sun began to set, Chloe came out to the garage and handed me a cold beer. She followed my gaze to Brenda's house. "Feeling proud of yourself?" she asked, a playful smile on her lips. I took a long sip of beer, the cold bottle a welcome relief in the humid evening air. "You know," I mused, "the bylaws probably have rules against excessive generator noise during a power outage." Chloe nudged me with her elbow. "You want to go poke the bear?" I watched Brenda's silhouette move past the candlelight in her window. A part of me, the petty part that had summoned the forklift army, was tempted. But looking around at my neighbors laughing and talking in my driveway, powered by the very machine that had started it all, I realized I had already won. The message had been sent, received, and emphatically understood. "Nah," I said, turning back to the party. "I think the Bears had enough for 1 week. They say you can't fight City Hall. That's probably true. But a homeowners association run by a petty tyrant with a binder? For that, it turns out you don't need lawyers or politicians. All you need is a good plan, a loyal crew, a deep understanding of the rules you're about to break, and a forklift convoy."